to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome back in to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show, a special film review episode. My name is Corey, and today we're going to dive into a player I once loved and now I cannot stand. Let's talk about what went wrong with Todd Gurley. What went wrong in the broader sense for Todd Gurley's 2020 is what you can see in this footage. Oftentimes, Todd Gurley would struggle to get anything over 4 or 5 yards on his runs, sometimes because of the offensive line and being met in the backfield, and sometimes because, and especially later on in the season, he's not the same Todd Gurley that we remember from a few years ago. There were often occasions where holes were available and there were running lanes for a better athlete, but Gurley definitely does not seem like the guy that he was a few years ago with the LA Rams, where he was breaking records, setting records, and lighting the fantasy world on fire with his tremendous runs. And that was very evident in the run that you're going to see coming up. The old Todd Gurley takes this run for possibly a first down, definitely at least 7 or 8 yards. But this Todd Gurley, this is a 3 or 4 yard run at most. And in these next 2 runs, you're going to see that Gurley still does have the wherewithal to shimmy and shake when he needs to, but he just doesn't have the ability to get back up to that elite level speed that we saw back in LA. And that's a big problem when you're looking for RB1 production. And it's in these clips why I've lost faith in what Todd Gurley can be for your fantasy team. At this time last year, I was pitching Todd Gurley as a sneaky RB1. And up until his bye week, Todd Gurley was just that. He was a top 10 running back who was producing a ton of points for your fantasy team. But if you go back to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show episode right at the Atlanta Falcons bye week, you're going to hear me tell you all to sell Todd Gurley now. And it was painful for me to say that, as I was this guy's strongest supporter in the offseason. But I was starting to see the writing on the wall that it's just not the old Todd Gurley. That first half of the fantasy season was a bit of a mirage because Todd Gurley was making his fantasy owners happy because of this. He was scoring a ton of touchdowns. Todd Gurley was considered the red zone running back because anytime the Falcons got within the 5, they were pounding the ball to Gurley and giving him all the opportunities in the world. But they were short. This right here is one of Gurley's longest touchdown runs, and it was an accident where his own team didn't want him to get in. And with that said, I think I have to say here that I don't see myself drafting Todd Gurley in the top 100 picks of the 2021 fantasy season when it comes to my fantasy football drafts. I just don't see it happening unless he winds up in an absolutely perfect situation for him. Gurley's premier situation at this point in his career is going to be sort of the early down back for a much better receiving and elusive type back. So a situation where he could potentially thrive would be with the LA Chargers, for example, possibly the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that has a better back on the team, but needs a bit of a bruiser because that's what Todd Gurley is these days. He's a bruiser. And given that he's so reliant on a situation, I don't see myself wanting to take this guy as my RB2, my RB3, or even my RB4 in drafts. It's a high-risk situation for 2021. And in those few and far between moments where Todd Gurley did look good, it was in these runs right here where he had a huge lane. Now, don't get me wrong, he still had to do what any good power back needs to do. He needs to be able to shrug off the first tackler like you see here, and he needs to be able to have enough speed to gain enough yardage to make himself relevant. But it's not what Todd Gurley used to do. In this next video, you're going to see a run against the Chargers where old Gurley makes a cut to the right where there's that huge hole, but he's just a ground and pound guy. And when he wasn't that guy, he'd find that hole. He'd find the hole to the right and he'd break off a nice big run using his power and his speed and his elusiveness. But that's not the version of Gurley you're getting in 2021. The 2021 Gurley is much riskier for your fantasy football team.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.